I'm 100 years late, but I think Charlie Chaplin might be the greatest filmmaker of all time. I've spent the last year watching every single movie that he directed, and I'm blown away by how well most of it holds up. Cinema has yet to see someone have the command of the medium quite like he did. Of the 95 films that Chaplin starred in, he wrote 82 of them, directed 72, edited 51, and even composed the score for 15 of them. He was able to strip comedy down to its simplest form, a language that can be understood no matter how old you are or what your native tongue may be. For a majority of his career, he was playing characters who were voiceless, while being a voice to the lower class, always using his films to make statements about society and the class struggle that happens every day all over the world. 100 years later, and he's seen as sort of a Mickey Mouse type character, but he's so much more than that. His work was so brave and boundary pushing for the medium at the time, and it's even more impressive looking back now. The stash, the hat, the cane, and his suit are so iconic now. They are as synonymous with the silent film era as anything else. But as the film industry began to change, Chaplin was forced to adapt. Charlie Chaplin was born in London in 1889. His family was extremely poor when he was growing up, but his parents were entertainers, and he started performing and tap dancing at the age of 5. This evolved into Charlie becoming a stage actor, and eventually having a vaudeville comedy act. He starred in his first one-reel comedy film at the age of 24, and started directing later that year. Charlie Chaplin was one of the highest paid people on the planet, and his work made him one of the most popular and beloved figures of all time. This is all extremely well documented. There's a century worth of literature that you can read about him and his life, but I want to focus on one piece of his artistry that often gets overlooked. Even though Charlie Chaplin is the king of silent film, I believe that he was one of the first artists in Hollywood to truly master the art of sound. The first of his films that he composed the score of was 1918's A Dog's Life, and he would do the same for most of his films going forward. Remember, this was back when sound wasn't even a part of the film, so his scores would be sent off to be played live by an orchestra inside of each movie theater. In the late 20s, when actual sound was introduced to cinema, Chaplin was skeptical, but as the true visionary he was, he figured out how to best adapt his style to the talkie era. You see, most other talkies of the new era were just excited to force as many words as possible into each film. But Chaplin knew that his famous role of the tramp, he was a character that people had grown to love over the past 2 decades, and making him talk would change the relationship between the audience and his character too much. The tramp was an iconic American character, the silent voice of the lower class, and if he used his natural British voice, it just wouldn't feel right. Chaplin's first film in the sound era was 1931's City Lights. This film is so interesting because he pretty much makes a silent film, but with sound incorporated to make the film's world a little more fleshed out. Early in the movie, a character gives a speech, and instead of playing the words, he uses sound effects similar to the adults in the Peanuts movies. This was him acknowledging the importance of sound, while still being a stubborn little prick about not necessarily needing it. It's almost as if he's saying, I'm so good at this, that I don't need words to convey what's going on. And even to this day, City Lights is known as one of the last great silent films. Title cards are still used in the film, but they are more to set up the location and what's happening in the big picture. The nuances of each scene are all displayed without words at all. He used the musical score instead of title cards to weave in motifs and let the audience know what to feel. Take a look at this clip where you can tell when they are talking about the woman, just because the score switches up to playing her theme. Chaplin used sound as an accent, showing a mastery of the craft of sound, even before he fully embraced it. 5 years later, he released his next film called Modern Times. By 1936, Hollywood was fully invested in sound, and Chaplin was one of the only artists holding on to the old ways of doing things. Chaplin made Modern Times just like he would have in the silent era, but he used sound to enhance the film even more, making it a true masterpiece of cinema. The film is all about the changing times of the 30s. Culture had shifted to be more product-based, and the world had become mechanical. Sounds are only used to accentuate when technology is being used. You hear all the noises in the factory that he works in, and you only hear people speak over the intercom.
Section 5, give it a limit.
But everything else still uses title cards and body language. He He wasn't just using sound because he could, he was using it to enrich the themes of the story that he was telling. For the entire movie, the tramp was still silent, and title cards were still used, but it all led up to one of the greatest endings in comedy history. In the climax of the movie, his character is putting on a performance, singing and dancing. After he forgets the words to the song, his friend advises him to just make it up. Then, for the first time ever, we, the audience, hear Charlie Chaplin's voice, singing in complete gibberish. This is known as the nonsense song, and it's a perfect blending of physical and sonic comedy. After building up a 20-year relationship with the audience, the first words that anyone heard him speak were nonsense. It was the ultimate subversion of expectations, and unlike anything I've ever seen tried in movies again. Charlie Chaplin was a trained musician. That's how he was able to compose his film scores. He supposedly couldn't read music, but he could feel it, and articulate what it needed to be. This song is complete nonsense, but you can still almost hear and understand exactly what he is meaning to say with these lyrics. In his first time ever speaking in a film, he mastered how to use his voice in the most unique way possible. After building up a 20-year relationship with his audience, the first words that anyone heard him say were complete nonsense, and it's still hilarious almost 90 years later. In modern times, Chaplin proved that he had a master's understanding of how to use sound to enhance each picture. For his next film, he would fully embrace the talkie era, playing not one, but two talking characters in The Great Dictator. This is one of the most important films ever made, critiquing the changing political climate of the world and satirizing the horrible ways of the Nazi Party before America even got involved in the war. The entire film is great, but it ends with an incredibly powerful statement from Chaplin himself. After 30 years of being the silent voice for the oppressed, Chaplin gives a speech that would call out everything that the world needed to hear at that moment.
In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, "The kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite."
To not only write, but deliver a monologue this powerful, showcased a skill set beyond what people ever thought he was capable of. Charlie Chaplin was the master of silent film, but once he fully embraced the talkies, he proved that he was a master at that as well. His next film, 1947's Monsieur Verdeaux, features one of the most brilliant scripts of the 40s. This was by far his most underrated film. He plays a serial killer who would go around from town to town, marrying different rich women, only to kill them and take their money when he needed some cash. In this film, he's a fast-talking and conniving schmoozer, who speaks with such speedy confidence that it's hard to believe that he's the same silent legend. Even though the film was a flop commercially, critics loved it, with one critic, James Agee, calling it the greatest male performance that he's ever seen in film. One of the actors in that film said, "It was easy to define the position held by Charlie Chaplin in the making of Monsieur Verdeaux. He was everything: writer, star, director, producer, and casting director, as well as supervisor of all other departments: costumes, scenery, makeup, lighting, shooting schedules, camera setups, and the musical score. He also crawled around on the floor with a knife, scraping up bits of old chewing gum stuck to the floor. For good measure, he'd entertain the troops between shots with hilarious imitations. Throughout cinema history, there's no one else who had such a command of the entirety of filmmaking as him." During the Red Scare, Chaplin was publicly accused of being a communist, forcing him to leave the United States. He would make 3 more films throughout the rest of his career. Limelight was very autobiographical, portraying an over-the-hill entertainer who was trying to recapture the magic of his younger act before the entertainment industry changed. This one had another fantastic script, and feels the most naturalistic of all of his films, showing that he was still evolving his style after all these years. 1957's A King in New York satirizes the communist witch hunt that exiled him from the industry, and 1967's A Countess in Hong Kong stars Marlon Brando in a nice little light comedy. These late-period Chaplin films will never be what he is most known for, but they are what solidified him as the legend that he is. His silent film contemporaries like Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd never adapted to the sound film era, and their legacies were left in the 20s because of it. Charlie Chaplin was the most dominant force of the first 50 years of the film industry. Now 100 years later, he's still known as the Tramp, and is one of the best physical performers of all time. But he is still one of the greatest filmmakers who has ever lived. So the next time that someone says that Charlie Chaplin is just some old guy who made silent films, make sure to set the record straight and let them know that he really was the first master of sound. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. This has been over a year-long project for me. I watched every single film that Chaplin directed, and it was a ton of fun, but also a lot, so I'm glad you guys watched this. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I've slowed down my video schedule on this channel to about once per month so that I could focus on my main channel, Def Goldblum, but I still have a bunch of dope videos planned for this channel, going all the way out to the next 5 months already. If you enjoyed this video and want to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that is greatly appreciated. Special thank you to my patrons, and as always, I got a lot more headed your way, so stay tuned, stay safe, and stay def. Thanks for watching.